Sufism and the Indian Philosophies by Sardar Iqbal Ali Shah. Previously published in Indo-Asian Culture 10, 1962. The very great strides which have been made in modern Western psychology towards an understanding of the human mind, together with the tireless researches of Western scholars in the field of Orientalism, have created within the last few decades a most important situation in the field of cultural research and understanding. In the first place, modern psychology in the West, which has been feeling its way through practical experiment towards establishing itself as a recognized science, has come to resemble more and more in shape, if not in terminology, the Oriental teachings about the potentialities of the human mind. Professor Rom Landau, in a recent book on the Spanish-Arabian philosopher Ibn al-Arabi, mentions that Freudian interpretations of dream symbolism were known to the ancient sages of the East. Again, Professor Jung, the founder of the other major school of psychology, the school of analytical psychology, was of the opinion that modern, that is, Western, pioneers in the study of the human mind had not attained the maturity of the thinkers of the East. Analytical psychology, he says in his most important book, Modern Man in Search of a Soul, is no longer bound to the consulting room of the doctor. Its chains have been severed. We might say that it transcends itself, now advances to fill that void which hitherto has marked the psychic insufficiency of Western culture as compared with that of the East. We Occidentals had learnt to tame and subject the psyche, but we knew nothing about its methodical development and its functions. Our civilization is still young, and we, therefore, required all the devices of the animal tamer to make the defiant barbarian and the savage in us, in some measure, tractable. But when we reach a higher cultural level, we must forego compulsion and turn to self-development. Well, Western psychology has forsaken the clinic and come back to self-development, to philosophy as it is understood in the East, as something which can develop mankind and make man and woman realize the higher destiny of the individual and of the community. In this respect, we differ from the partial thinkers who have in all times passed for philosophers. I refer to the logicians, speculative theologians and traders in words who have sought, always in the end unsuccessfully, to teach that man can arrive at objective truth through juggling with words, or through using reason as opposed to his inborn ability to distinguish truth and reality. Know thyself, which the psychologists postulate as the first essential, has always been a part of Indian as of Sufi philosophy, whether used in the Sanskrit term jnana, knowledge, or in the Arabic phrase man arafa nafsahu, arafa rabbahu. It is through the path of self-knowledge that ultimate truth and real reality is reached. Before we go any further, we have to make a clear distinction between the inner philosophy of the Sufis as well as of the Indian schools and the philosophy of religion. The difference, briefly, is this. In all forms of ordinary organizational religion, there are certain beliefs and certain practices which, taken together, are considered to be sufficient to imply that the practitioner is a believer in that religion. But the members of the initiatory schools go very much further than this. First, they say you must know what religion really is. Then you will know whether you believe in it or not. The Buddha's teaching was clearly calculated to make the disciple conscious of himself first, so that subsequently he would be able to banish self. It is obvious that in order to banish a thing, you must first recognize it. In order to recognize it, you must develop within yourself the ability to assess it. There is no golden key to enlightenment. Both the Sufi and the Indian schools teach that man must be capable of receiving a teaching before he can be taught. There can be no attaining any enlightenment until the individual is ready for it. It is to produce these favourable conditions for understanding that, in both the Indian and the Sufi systems, there is the institution of the human guide or teacher, whose first task is to prepare the disciple for the knowledge of himself, so that he is able to become enlightened. The Sufi path of development is not a process or a philosophy foreign to India. Some of the greatest of Sufi teachers lived and taught in India, and many of them are buried in India. Sufism, in one sense, came to India. So did the Aryan invaders. Sufism, again, is not regarded by its practitioners as something which originated at a specific place in space, or at a point in time. Before there were vines on this earth, the great master Jalaluddin Rumi reminds us, the Sufis drank the wine of wisdom, the spiritual wine of knowledge. Another master says, Sufism is too sublime to have had an origin. This was Hujwiri, the author of the Sufi classic Kashf al-Majub, who was buried on Indian soil and is revered by people of all faiths as a great teacher under the honorific of Data Ganj Baksh. The philosophical stream from which the common root of Sufism and Indian philosophies stemmed may conveniently be termed tariqa, a way of travelling, and also a method of doing a thing. To divide it and categorize it as yoga and Sufism is useful only in a limited but not in an ultimate sense. In such books as The Cultural History of India, Sufism is claimed to have inspired the founder of the Sikh religion, Rabindranath Tagore, Kabir, and scores of others. Again, a superficial belief is that Sufism was itself originally influenced by Vedantism. The division is in the eye of the beholder. When there is a mighty river which branches into smaller streams, these streams may be called separate rivers, but equally they may all be fed by the melting snows of some colossal mountain which is the goal of the search. The organization, procedure, methods, and ideas of the followers of the truth, as of the followers of any objective reality, must be very similar, and there is an end to it. That there is cultural interchange between the followers of truth is inevitable, desirable, and necessary. To make this contact the main object of one's attention is absurd. The buyer of halva is interested in what it tastes like, and not where its ingredients came from and how. Even this parallel is inadequate, for to us the origin of sugar is sweetness, and there, as I have said, is an end to it. In Western countries, books on Oriental religion and philosophy, many of them of a more or less occult nature, are appearing in increasing numbers. A second major aggregation of books is concerned with psychology. Western man is facing the crisis of trying to replace his failing religious values with a personality which shall give meaning and purpose to his life. Personality, that much misused word, is derived from the Latin word persona, which signifies a mask. A mask worn during a stage play, with the intention of conveying to the audience something of the character portrayed by the actor. In the East, the personality is very far from a mask. It is the external view of what actually is inside the man. The objective of practical philosophy of the Sufi and Indian schools is an inner transformation. The diffusion of this sense of the integrated personality during the period from the Middle Ages until the present day has been a joint undertaking of the Sufi and Indian schools of philosophical thought and action. This task, the methodology and results of which are abundantly plain in recorded material, has been carried out in an atmosphere of struggle. What has this struggle been? Western philosophy, upon which depend many of the lines of thinking of the past 2 centuries, is built partly upon Greek and Roman philosophy. In the form in which this philosophy reached the West, the odds were heavily weighted in favour of pure speculation and juggling with words. In the process of transmission of the knowledge of the ancients to the West, a very curious thing happened. In the teachings of Pythagoras and Plato, there is indeed a concentration upon the intellect, but it is only this one portion which appears in the books. Equating the teachings of the Western classical world with those of the East will show that the intellectual exercises which pass for philosophy are only a part of the picture. The important part, the actual practice of self-cultivation, has been left out. It survives in the Sufi and Indian systems. Take the classic syllogism of logic. Man is a liar. I am a man. Therefore I am a liar. Therefore when I say man is a liar, I am lying. Therefore man is not a liar. The fallacy is, of course, that the statement man is a liar does not need to apply to every situation. This is all very well, as far as it goes. But it does not go far enough. The purpose of introducing such ideas into the mind, practiced by all initiatory schools, is not to exercise your wits, but to point to the limitations of language. Man cannot, in the final analysis, rely upon words in order to arrive at truth. So the books of the Greeks were not fully understood. They are still not understood, and people play with them, like the child who has a book of problems and no answers. The philosophy which we share, the practical wedded to the theoretical, is something of greater completion than the speculative or rhetorical which has passed for philosophy in the West. People like Aldous Huxley in America are now feeling their way towards an understanding of experiential philosophy, as opposed to verbal juggling. Their books seem rather negative, tentative, and incomplete. But the movement has started. They turn their attention, interestingly enough, towards two main fields for further support of their feeling that there is something within man which awaits realization and is the ultimate source of truth: Sufism and Indian philosophy. Zen Buddhism, now in vogue in the West, is an offshoot of Buddhism. In other words, the Chinese Chan and Japanese form of a school of Indian thought. There is a movement in the West which looks towards the Vedantic ways of thought for the same reason. The influence of the Sufis upon every branch of Western thought has been immense and continuous. Nietzsche of Germany quotes Hafiz as the one who really knows and experiences. Goethe's work is soaked in Sufism, and even the Christian St. John of the Cross has been found by Professor Palacios to have taken his ideas and many of his quotations direct from the Illuminist school, the Isha Qawiya of the Sufis, as represented by Ibn Arabi and today the Shadhiliya of North Africa. However, philosophical movements in the West which are based upon Eastern models rapidly turn away from the main theme, that of self-realization. There is only one reason for this. No school of human study can survive entirely by means of theory or the printed page. The continuous and repeated refreshment of Indian and Sufi teaching has come about and been maintained only because there has been a perennial succession of teachers, masters, those who knew how to carry the disciple from one stage to the next in this mission of self-realization. I have purposefully avoided invoking the technical terms and dogmas which from time to time coalesce around teaching schools and make them appear different from other schools. I have done this deliberately, because the essence of initiatory knowledge, for the Indian schools and the Sufis alike, has always been their common denominator, the search for truth through a blending of theory and practice. I have set myself the task of explaining what the mediocre scholastics have made a dreary and footnote-loaded task, by means of ideas and references which are easily grasped by all. For if there is to be any reality in self-development, that reality must ultimately be a simplicity, not a multiplicity. As one of the sages has put it, unity underlies all multiplicity. Your attention is only confused by 1,000 coloured sweets, if what you are trying to understand is sugar and not the sweets individually. This sense of unity and the final unification of experience is central to the two initiatory schools of which yoga and Sufism are expressions. What of methodology? How do we go about the applying of the teaching of self-realization and unification? We cannot measure in terms of human advantage the effect upon countless millions of people of a succession of teachers of the self-development schools throughout the millennia. The general effect has been there to which we may ascribe that difference, that ascendancy which the East has over the West in terms of the power of the human spirit, the composure of the personality. And we disregard it at our peril, because it is the very basis of our lives. The second characteristic is that of tolerance. Indian society today is possible only because of it. In its political and social expression, it takes the form of secularism. But the secularism of India is rooted not in modern Western concepts of materialism or atheism, but in the immemorial concept that the next man has as much right to his inner experiences as I. We should never mistake this important source of tolerance, however much it may superficially resemble any other form of tolerance. The man who wishes to enter the path of self-realization must practice these virtues in himself first, before he can accept them from others as his right. Hence the methodology of the Sufi and Indian schools insists, each perhaps in its own way, upon tolerance of others and also upon individual composure of mind. How is composure attained? Composure is necessary because the unregenerate mind is, in fact, not one mind or self. It is composed of a number of confused, often conflicting selves. These must first be focused, integrated, centralized, stabilized. Only when this is done can the mind work as one entity, capable of tackling the larger job of producing the ideal man, the man who lies hidden, or rather incipient, within us all. This is where the teacher comes into the picture. He is the guide who will enable the seeker to find his way in life. There are false teachers, just as there are bad goldsmiths. But inner cognition plus careful observation tells all but the foolish which is the master for him. Far from being old-fashioned, anachronistic, mumbo-jumbo, the discoveries of the ancient schools which are represented in the work of the Sufis today are the result of the enlightened, progressive investigation into the human mind. Metaphysical elaborations, meaningless accretions, have surrounded a great deal of Sufi preaching, and confused, misrepresented even, the truths of these inner schools. But nothing can destroy their essential validity.